Welcome to the discussion of Medicine Made Easy with me, Kavitendral. Today we'll be seeing an important topic which is related to ENT and community medicine. Let's get started. Once upon a time, there was an industrial worker who complains of high-pitched tinnitus, and he also had hard of hearing, but only in noisy areas. But as the day goes, he has complaints of hard of hearing when someone is even speaking. And on investigation, after clinical examination, his audiometry showed a dip in 4000 Hz, both in the air conduction and as well bone conduction. Hope you have guessed the topic. Yes, it is the occupational hearing loss or the noise induced hearing loss. Welcome to the discussion of noise induced hearing loss, NIHL. Basically, if you have guessed NIHL or some other thing, you have to be very clear that some other thing is, it could be an acoustic trauma. If you have guessed it is acoustic trauma and wondering why it is not an acoustic trauma, here is the solution. Basically, an acoustic trauma does mean about the single brief exposure of a loud sound. That sound could be of more than 140 decibel, and the brief time could be even at the lowest of 0.2 millisecond. So this causes an acoustic trauma, and this is always cause permanent damage to the ear. Whereas in contrast, the noise induced hearing loss is a prolonged exposure of less intense sound, and the damage which is caused is also temporary and as well permanent. So based on some mechanism which is underlying that, damage could be temporary or permanent. Let us now see what is that mechanism is. Yes, the mechanism is called threshold shift. Now what happens whenever there is a loud noise, the ear sensitivity of that noise is actually decreased. This is called a threshold shift, but this threshold shift is basically dependent on the frequency of that sound, the intensity of the sound, the duration of the sound, and the pre-existing ear disease. Supposing if he is a normal ear, okay fine, he can have a temporary threshold shift, but if it is already an pathologic ear, then the prognosis is not good. And susceptibility of the person, some like an occupational health worker who is working in a boil industry and so on, are at more risk. So if it is relating to frequency, remember it is 2000 to 3000 Hz. The frequency is harmful. Nearly till 4000 Hz it is harmful according to Park. The intensity, they say that something called 5 decibel rule, that is, for every 5 decibel increase in sound intensity, there should be the permitted exposure. According to Government of India, the permitted exposure should be less than half an hour. This is to be noted. And then the duration. See, supposing if the noise is of continuous noise, then comparing to continuous noise and intermittent noise, the continuous noise is known to cause a permanent or a devastating damage to the ears. Now, what are the types of this threshold shift? Basically, a person who is exposed to less intense noise, that is, a person who is going to develop noise induced hearing loss in near future, will have either a temporary threshold shift or a permanent threshold shift. In temporary threshold shift, the recovery is present, but in case of a permanent threshold shift, the recovery is not present. Before moving on to the next subtopic, we shall know the normal values which is related to hearing. So the normal hearing frequency for humans is 20 to 20,000 Hz. To remember it more easily, it is humans. Like take humans, we usually pronounce this way, HU2. So it is two words. So something related to 2 it will be the numerical 2, and man's is 4 letters. So put 4 zeros, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it is 20 to 20,000 Hz is the normal hearing frequency, and this is the way we can easily remember. And routine auditory frequency test, that what we do in audiometry test, it is from 125 Hz to 8000 Hz. There is something separate. This is routinely used, but in different audiometry, that is, on high frequency audiometry is the one that records the hearing loss of more than 8000 Hz. This is very classical for ototoxicity. So person who lands up in ototoxicity can be detected. The toxicity of the drug which causes damage to the ear is detected by this high frequency audiometry. Now, what is actually a frequency is? Basically, frequency means that is 1 hertz of frequency is equal to 1 wave which is produced per second. This is called a frequency. 1 hertz is equal to 1 wave per second. Now, what is the expected damage by this chronic exposure of less intense sound? Whenever there is chronic exposure of less intense sound, there can be injury to the basal tone of cochlea. That is, we know, as we see, the medial wall of the middle ear is, we have a prominent bulge called promontory, and promontory is because of the basal tone of cochlea. Yes, because of this chronic exposure of less intense sound, the promontory is affected, that is the basal tone of cochlea is affected. And in the inner ear, the organ of Corti, we know it has outer and inner hair cells. The outer hair cells are more affected than the inner hair cells, or rather the outer hair cells are first affected than the inner hair cells. If at all a sound is more than 160 decibels, that is an high intense impulse sound, it causes a perforation or a rupture in the tympanic membrane. There's something called PHON, PHON, that is psychoacoustic index. This measures the intensity and frequency of a sound. If your mind is still wondering the difference between the Carrat's notch and Boiler's notch, yes, here is your answer. Carrat's notch is basically seen in otosclerosis, that is a dip which is usually seen in 2000 Hz in the bone conduction, that is Carrat's notch. Boiler's notch is what we are discussing now, and we have discussed, that is at 4000 Hz there is a dip in bone conduction and as well in air conduction in the audiogram. This is characteristic in noise-induced hearing loss. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Let's get continued in the next video with the prevention of this noise-induced hearing loss.